want to tell you about someone who was in self-isolation because of a medical condition that he had. Now, you may be watching this and thinking, well, there's nothing new there. Most of the country, in fact, most of the world are in isolation or lockdown at the moment. But this man wasn't from our time. He was from the time of Jesus. And the reason that he was in lockdown or isolation was because of a medical condition that he had called leprosy. That's a term that the Bible uses. The modern term is Hansen's disease. And Hansen's disease or leprosy is an awful condition. Not only does it cause the skin on your body to flake, but it also eventually wastes away the nerve endings. And in some extreme cases, you could be picking up something that is extremely hot and you won't know, you won't be any the wiser. And it would eventually scar and people can lose digits off their hands or lose limbs off their body. If you had leprosy in the time of Jesus, according to Jewish tradition, not only did you have to live with this awful condition, but you also had to live with a major social stigma. And that's where the isolation bit comes in. Because according to Leviticus 13, you had to be taken outside of the city walls. As soon as you were given that diagnosis, you had to say goodbye to your family and to your friends and to move outside the city, which itself was not the safest place at all. But you had to distance yourself from family and friends. If you had to come into the city for whatever reason, you had to stand a certain distance from people and you had to shout, "Unclean, unclean." And there was a huge stigma around lepers. Even now that word has creeped into our modern vernacular. Every space and time has got its own stigma. Whether it be a condition that you have or a physical illness like HIV or AIDS, you might have a stigma from even something as simple as the colour of your skin or who your parents are or the way that you walk and talk. This condition is not pleasant to look at. I imagine it's not overly pleasant to live with either. So let's read the text together. It says this: "A man with leprosy came and knelt in front of Jesus, begging to be healed. 'If you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean,' he said. Moved with compassion, Jesus reached out and touched him. 'I am willing,' he said. 'Be healed.' Instantly the leprosy disappeared and the man was healed. Then Jesus sent him on his way with a stern warning. 'Don't tell anyone about this. Instead, go to the priest and let him examine you. Take along the offering required in the law of Moses for those who have been healed of leprosy. This will be a public testimony that you have been cleansed.' But the man went and spread the word, proclaiming to everyone what had happened. As a result, large crowds soon surrounded Jesus, and he couldn't publicly enter a town anywhere. He had to stay out in the secluded places, but people from everywhere kept coming to him." Mary Read was born in Ohio in 1854, the same year that this church was built. Now, when Mary grew up, she knew that God wanted her to go and to be a missionary to the people of India. And so she did, and it was while there that she came across a leper colony of 500 people, people who were left to fend for themselves because no other outside help could come in and help them. She felt helpless herself. She could watch on as these people had to suffer this awful condition. She went away for the next year into other parts of India and done other ministry work, but she couldn't get these people, these lepers, out of her mind. She was reminded of the words of the Apostle Paul when he writes to the church in Philippi, and he says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but rather in humility value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus." She knew that Jesus healed lepers. And she had a strong desire to go and to help these people, this leper colony. Anyway, one day she collapsed and she had to be taken back to America for some treatment. And the doctors there couldn't get a diagnosis. They couldn't get to the bottom of what was happening because her fingers were cold and she had no feeling in them. And she started to have growths coming out of her head. She knew what the diagnosis was long before they did. She knew that she had herself contracted leprosy. Now, here's the amazing thing. Instead of feeling self-pity, and instead of being angry at God, she actually thanked God for this diagnosis. This diagnosis that normally would have caused absolute dread. She moved forward because she knew that she could go back to that leper colony and help these people. And so she did, and for years she was back living in amongst those lepers. Today's miracle is full of twists and turns. In my Bible, the heading reads simply, Jesus heals a man with leprosy. And you might at first glance read that and think, this is going to be a good news story. And it is a good news story. And the man does come to Jesus and the man is healed of his leprosy. But it also leads to tragedy. It leads to disobedience of what Jesus has asked them to do. Now, we're going to give a little bit more time to our discussion on Sunday over to that very issue. But what I want to focus on is the actual healing miracle itself. What happened when Jesus meets the man. So let's read it again, verse 41 and 42. It says, moved with compassion, Jesus reached out and touched him. I am willing, he said, be healed. Instantly, leprosy disappeared and the man was healed. So let's split this up, and just for the next moment or two, let's draw a couple of lessons from it. So the first bit of text says that Jesus was moved with compassion. This is a theme that Mark, as you're well aware by now, is starting to build up, is that Jesus does things because of his heart for compassion. When he's in the synagogue and he heals the man that is demon-possessed, he is filled with compassion. When he heals Simon's mother-in-law, he is filled with compassion for both Simon and his mother-in-law. And the many people who come to him to be healed of many diseases, he doesn't turn any of them away because he is filled with compassion. And here Mark articulates it. He says it in plain words. He says he was moved with compassion. Now, the man who comes to see Jesus, we don't know a huge amount about. We don't know how long he's had this illness for. He could have had it for weeks, for months, for years. I anticipate he's had it for a while because he comes to Jesus in absolute desperation. And he kneels down and he begs of Jesus to heal him. And Jesus does something that's recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. He takes the man and he touches him. Leprosy, this repulsive condition, and yet Jesus touches him. Let's take a step back for a moment and understand the ramifications for us. There's an old hymn that says, then the hand of Jesus touched me, and now I am no longer the same. He touched me, and oh, the joy that floods my soul. Something happened, and now I know he loves me, and he's made me whole. And then Jesus gives a statement and then a command. The statement is in response to the man's assertion that Jesus can heal him. He says, if you're willing, you can make me well. And then Jesus' statement says, I am willing. And then he says two simple words by way of healing. He says, be healed. He doesn't call the stewards to come from the side and to catch the man as he falls. He doesn't shout or say any magic words or superstitions. He simply says, be healed. Now, what this shows me is the absolute authority that Jesus has, that he simply speaks the words and the man is healed. Now, what should have happened in this instance? The man who had a social exclusion zone around him. Remember that no one was allowed to step into where he was. Jesus comes into his space. Not only that, but he also takes him and touches him. Now, what should have happened was that then Jesus is unclean, and he should have left the city. He should have been outside of the walls of the city. But instead, something happens because of the authority of who we're talking about. The fact that this was the Son of God. Because something of the purity and something of the holiness of Jesus leaves him and is imparted to the man, and the man is made well. So lessons from a leper. Someone who's an outcast, someone who is in isolation. And a reminder also of the authority of Jesus as the Son of God. God bless you all.